Yes, please continue, Mr. Teague.
Thank you, Mr. President. In relation to attacks on the investigators, just two more examples of what Dr. Karadžić considers a mistake. He said that Dragan Mijokovic committed, quote, mistakes which disqualify everything that he provided to this case, unquote. But it is not even clear from the citations he offers what part of the testimony he could conceivably consider a mistake, such as at T8591 through 92, or 8631 through 633, with the latter passage concluding with the presiding judge admonishing Dr. Karadžić that his line of questioning involving, quote, asking the witness to draw meaningless lines is unhelpful, unquote. Similarly, he claims that Emir Turkasic made mistakes, for example, at 9066 through 69, and that passage concludes with a comment from the presiding judge that it was unclear what point Karadžić was even trying to make. The quote was from the presiding judge, "What I wanted you to do is repeat your question instead of wrapping up on your part. What was your question? It's not clear to us what the question was and what the answer was," unquote. And he made similar unfounded attacks on the credibility of international witnesses. For instance, at T47980, he falsely accused Jeremy Bowen of lying about the position of Serb gunners. In fact, Bowen frankly acknowledged at the outset of his testimony that he had made a mistake as to the location of the shooter of a busload of children in one of his stories, a mistake caused by the fact that he had been in the city a short time. And Bowen emphasized that the mistake had, quote, no bearing, unquote, on the overall truth of the report. That's found at T10079 and 10081. In another example, at T47974, Karadžić falsely claimed that Banbury, quote, admitted, unquote, that, quote, the Muslim side had actually carried out tricks in order to deceive the international community, unquote, and he accused Banbury of failing to put that in his original statement. In fact, as can be shown at 13369 through 70, Banbury agreed only that the Bosnian Serb authorities made these kinds of allegations and that he took note of their, quote, warnings, unquote. Similarly, Karadžić tried and failed to undermine Harlan's evidence by asserting at T47976 that Harlan, quote, said in his own words he was there to defend the government, and the measures and the agreements did not apply to the government forces, unquote. He cited to transcript page 2066 in paragraphs 3133 of Harlan's amalgamated statement. Neither reference contains any evidence even remotely supporting this proposition. Mr. President, let me now turn to the accused submissions related to Srebrenica. First, an isolated or preliminary matter. At transcript pages 48024 to 48028, Karadžić argued that the Srebrenica-related graves included victims from prior to 1995. P4841 is a BIH Federal Commission for Missing Persons list of persons exhumed in Bosnia in various municipalities, including Zvornik, between 1996 and 2007. And I refer you also to P4837 at paragraphs 31, 64, and 72. Karadžić points to individuals whose disappearance predates 1995 and argues that they should be discounted from the total number of 1995 Srebrenica victims. But that reasoning is flawed. The individuals on P4841 whose disappearance predates 1995 were not counted by Jans and do not form part of the total figure of 5,977 victims identified in Srebrenica-related graves. And for that, see the Srebrenica narrative, paragraphs 170 through 171. two individuals listed at P 4841 at lines 2025 and 2128 have dates of disappearance listed as 12 July 1990 and 12 July 1905, respectively. It is clear that the year of disappearance listed there or recorded there for those two individuals is an obvious data entry error. And in fact, the ICMP records their date of disappearance as July 1995, and for that, see P 5913. I can also direct Your Honor's attention to P 4771 at page 145, line 294, and P 107, and page 107 rather, line 18. But let me move on to the bulk of the Srebrenica submissions by the accused. What is the defense case? Mr. Robinson said in his submissions on Thursday that thousands of Bosnian Muslim prisoners were executed by the likes of Frank Kos and Dražan Erdemović. That's T 47952 through 53. He claims that a reasonable inference is that, quote, Karadžić never planned or ordered those executions, unquote, that they were, quote, concealed from him, unquote, and that he is therefore, quote, not guilty of genocide, unquote. That's T 47938, and see also 47947, lines 16 through 17. He went on to claim, referring to the 2 August intercept in which Beara and Stevo talk about getting back from the Republic of Serbia Muslim men who had fled across the River Drina, that Beara may have been saying that it would be no good if Karadžić agreed to exchanges, and then the lack of prisoners from Srebrenica became known, and that this shows that Karadžić had no knowledge that the prisoners would be executed or had been executed. And Mr. Robinson added, quote, and there were reasons for people in the VRS to have concealed executions from President Karadžić, T 47947. It seems that Mr. Robinson is arguing that Beara and the VRS were concealing executions from Karadžić, and this is also what is said or implied in the defense brief, paragraphs 3039, 3110, 3114, 15, 53, 81 through 84, 3257, 3259 through 60, 80 through 81, 85, and 98. Who is Karadžić blaming? He said on Thursday, quote, now what happened when they entered Srebrenica? I saw a few killings of some people who happened to be there by members of that well-known platoon, and the members of this platoon took part in the killing of POWs, T 48022. He was referring to the 10th Sabotage Detachment. Then he said, quote, none of my generals or ministers should even have been indicted, let alone convicted and sentenced to very long terms of imprisonment. It is justice that was condemned. T 48025 through 26. So, is Karadžić blaming Colonel Beara as Mr. Robinson does? Does the defense blame Mladić and the VRS main staff, or not? What is the defense case? In any event, blaming Beara, who told KDZ 320 that his orders to get rid of the Muslim prisoners in Zvornik came from, quote, 2 presidents, that's found at our brief at 992 through 95, and who told Stevo in the 2 August intercept that they now had to tell our chief and the Supreme Chief, that is Mladić and Karadžić, blaming Beara does not exculpate Karadžić. But both Mr. Robinson and Mr. Karadžić blame executioners like Frank Kos and Dražan Erdemović, both of whom were members of the 10th Sabotage Detachment, a unit that was directly subordinated to Mladić, see paragraph 823 of our brief, under the command and control, therefore, of General Mladić and Radovan Karadžić. And on the 16th of July, 1995, 8 members of the 10th Sabotage Detachment, including Kos and Erdemović, traveled under orders from their base in Dragicevac to the Zvornik Brigade's headquarters. From there, they were taken to Branevo Farm, where they executed over 1,000 Muslim men. Bayara told them in the immediate aftermath of the executions, quote, "You have done a great job, and the state will be grateful to you," unquote. See 1014 through 1020 of our brief. And the Republika Srpska state was grateful to them. In January 1996, the VRS and MUP leadership, including Dragan Kijac, then Minister of the Interior, collaborated to protect members of the 10th Sabotage Detachment from arrest and transfer to the ICTY by issuing them fake IDs. That's at our brief, paragraph 1070. On the 22nd of March 1996, Karadžić had a meeting with Mladić, see 1058 through 59 and 1071 through 74 of our brief. U.S. Secretary of State Albright had just visited the execution and burial site at Branevo Farm, which is in the Pilica area. Karadžić talked about this in his closing, and he said, quote, "Nothing did happen in Srebrenica. My attention is being drawn to Srebrenica and to civilians, and whatever is happening happened 80 to 100 kilometers away from Srebrenica, and it wasn't happening to civilians. And of course, when we got the first convincing evidence, these mortal remains on the surface, when Madeleine Albright found this, then there were orders to investigate that, and the military prosecutor said no one know anything about this, and no one wants to know anything about this. There was an immediate response." That's at T48023. Karadžić was not being honest. Remember the contemporaneous statement, a record made by Mladić in his diary of what Karadžić said following Albright's visit. Quote, "A big show was put on for Albright. She expected they would find 1,200 Muslim bodies at Pilica, but they found some 5 bodies," unquote. That's P1490, page 47. When Karadžić said that Albright expected to find 1,200 bodies, he was referring to an account of the Branevo Farm executions which had appeared in the Bosnian press that day. An interview with Dražan Erdemović, one of the executioners whom he and Mr. Robinson blame. That's P6451. Karadžić's subordinates put on a, quote, "big show," unquote, for Albright. It is clear that he knew then that the bodies of the Muslim men and boys had been removed from the mass grave at Branevo Farm and reburied months earlier. That's why they only found, quote, "some 5 bodies," unquote, as Karadžić said. On the following day, 23 March 1996, Karadžić ordered the VRS main staff and MUP to set up a, quote, "mixed expert commission," unquote, of 3 members each, quote, "to fully investigate and determine the facts regarding the alleged discovery of 2 decomposed bodies at the scene of earlier battles with the Muslim side in the Pilica area, Zvornik municipality." That's P3163, pages 6 and 8. This is the order to which Karadžić referred in his closing at T48023. But there were no battles in the Pilica area, see T25357. There were only mass executions of unarmed Muslim prisoners. Karadžić's order was a sham, part of the cover-up. The commission's membership, the MUP and VRS, assured that there would be no real investigation, and there wasn't. This was confirmed by a meeting on 25 March chaired by Dragomir Vasic, and a military prosecutor, Drinic, who attended the meeting, quote, "by accident," unquote, reported after, quote, "None of the people present knew any details of the locality and of the actions that needed to be undertaken, nor was anyone informed about what would be found on site, or else no one wanted to know," unquote. See our brief at 1074 and P3163. Karadžić alluded to this evidence in his closing at T48023. There was never an investigation or prosecution by either the VRS or MOOP into the Srebrenica events, nor was there ever intended to be. And see paragraph 1054 of our brief. I also refer you to paragraph 1075 and remind you of Karadžić's 1 April 1996 order for another investigation that was never intended to happen, and the evidence related to that. In the Srebrenica component, as in the other aspects of the case, the defense seeks to have you consider evidence in isolation, detached from the totality of the evidence. Let's just take one of the, quote, facts, unquote, that Mr. Robinson drew to your attention last week. Quote, fact, Dr. Karadžić spoke with Miroslav Duronić on 13 July at 2010. Duronić informed him that they had 2,000 and there would be more during the night. Dr. Karadžić said that all goods must be placed in the warehouses by 12 o'clock tomorrow, not in warehouses there, but somewhere else. Duronić said he understood. Mr. Robinson went on to say that a reasonable inference is that Karadžić was referring to sending the prisoners to Botković, not Zvornik, where they were delivered for death. Mr. Robinson asked rhetorically how Duronić could possibly understand that the prisoners were to go to Zvornik, and that Botković was the likely place in view of Milenko Todorović's testimony that they received instructions at one point to prepare Botković prison to receive prisoners from Srebrenica. But let's tether to the totality of the evidence the extraordinary fact that Karadžić told Duronić that all the goods, that is 2,000 men and more to come, must be placed in the warehouses by 12 o'clock tomorrow, not there, but somewhere else. Fact, by the time of this call, Mladić had given an order that the Bosnian Muslim men were to be moved to Zvornik to be killed. See paragraphs 955 and 966 of our brief. Fact, Duronić told Beara that it was Karadžić's instructions that the Muslim men were to be moved to Zvornik. See paragraph 965 of our brief. Fact, at this meeting, the only issue was where, not if, the prisoners were to be killed. That is the meeting where Duronić spoke to Beara. That's at our brief at footnote 3495. Fact, by 7 p.m., preparations were commencing for receipt of the thousands of prisoners who were being sent to Zvornik to be shot. And see paragraphs 956 and 957 of the confidential brief. Fact, Todorović's evidence is that he had instructions from Tolomir to prepare Botković camp and then was told by Tolomir to stop preparations. See our brief at footnote 3488. It is crystal clear that the Supreme Commander was instructing his subordinate what to do in that phone call. Clear he was telling him what to do, and clear it was done. The, quote, reasonable inference, unquote, posited by the defense is that every single institution of state, the Army, the police, the civilian authorities, ignored the Supreme Commander's instructions and then engaged in a lavish conspiracy of silence to ensure that no one told him, including his trusted commissioner. Mr. President, Your Honors, I mentioned earlier the contrast between Mr. Robinson's condemnation of Beara and other members of the VRS and Dr. Karadžić's rousing support for, quote, my generals, unquote. Karadžić knows that he cannot accept the reality of what happened to the Srebrenica Muslims at the hands of the VRS because that condemns him. Condemns the man who had his finger on the pulse of the operation from its very inception, who monitored it personally in the planning stages, who issued instructions to move the prisoners from the last arguable place they might have had a chance to the place where there was no reason for them to be other than to be executed. the man who had to approve any change in the operations that would allow Muslim men and boys to get out alive, the man whose top officials traveled to the area and reported back to him, who chortled over the reburials that seemingly would prevent the world from ever knowing what really happened, who created transparently sham, quote, investigations, unquote, as a laughable fig leaf to cover his tracks. He knows that the truth of his responsibility is exposed by the totality of this overwhelming evidence, and so he seeks to treat each piece in isolation or irrationally deny them. Your Honors, in the case of the Srebrenica component, as in the totality of the case, Dr. Karadžić's ceaseless efforts to justify, deflect, obfuscate, mischaracterize, and outright misrepresent have culminated in the submissions we've just discussed, in which sweeping and unsupported generalizations are juxtaposed with citations that misrepresent or invert facts, or even invent a new reality. These were not the flailing attempts of an uneducated man, but of a man desperate to deny the facts that condemn him. These facts reveal beyond a reasonable doubt his guilt on all counts of the indictment. Mr. President, that would conclude the submissions, except for the remaining question by the court about count 7. The court had inquired about deportation in relation to the municipalities and the mens rea in connection with that. So I would turn first to, of course, to count 7, which indicates at paragraph 68 the commission of forcible transfer and deportation from the municipalities. Those municipalities are defined in count 3 at paragraph 48, as the court is aware. Insofar as the mens rea is concerned, forcible transfer is the forcible displacement of persons which may take place within national borders. That was found by the Stockage Appeals judgment at paragraph 317. Whereas the crime of deportation requires the displacement of individuals across a border, either a de jure border or displacement across a de facto border, the determination of which is a case-by-case determination based on the circumstances. As far as the mens rea is concerned, in the case of forcible transfer, since the ultimate location doesn't form a part of the elements, the mens rea is established by virtue of the intent to forcibly displace the individual. In the case of deportation, since displacement across a border is an element, the mens rea must encompass that element, and the prosecution must establish that the accused intended to displace the person across a de jure or de facto border.
And you cannot further identify specific incidents that is charged as deportation in this case, in the mentioned municipalities.
Well, some come to mind. For example, I know that it was the men from the population of Bosanski Novi, if I recall correctly, was displaced across. Well, first of all, let me step back more broadly. In virtually every case, the forcible displacement was intended to get people, Muslims and Croats, outside of RS, which constituted a de facto border. That's at the essence of what was being done.
So, for example, let me put it simply: if we find no evidence of deportation with respect to a specific municipality,
I'm sorry,
No,
is the question whether there was
Then
any
whether-
displacement at all?
My question is whether accused need to be acquitted of that count. No, it's because you referred to 20 or 19 municipalities as whole. I will leave it at that.
Okay.
I will consult my colleagues. Yes, the chamber will leave it at that.
Just one possibility, Mr. President, and that is, in paragraph 48, we do identify the individual municipalities,
Yes.
one by one.
Before we break, shall we go into private session briefly?
Blir på session.
I take it an hour would be sufficient.
Yes, Mr. President.
Shall we resume at 12 o'clock? Yes.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.